Hey folks, welcome to HU 3120, Scientific and Technical Communication. Today we're going to be talking about organizing for readers. This is going to be found in Chapter 10 or the printouts for some of you, since the book orders didn't tend to go through, what have you. But anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to just jump right on into this. So the learning objectives for the day are going to be: one, we're going to be working from an introduction body conclusion structure. We're going to create informal and formal outlines, prepare a storyboard for a long document, shape effective paragraphs, chunk information into discrete units, provide overviews for longer documents, and organize information for global audiences. So instead of forcing readers to kind of like make sense of unstructured information, we tend to shape this material for their understanding. So it helps to relate that information a little better. So you want to consider the following. What relationships do the collected data suggest? Okay. What is the best way in which I can show this to my readers or to my watchers? What should I emphasize? What is the particular main focus point argument for whatever document you're creating? In which sequence will readers approach this material? What belongs there and why? All right, what do I say first? That's a big one. It's often very difficult to come right out and just to kind of like introduce something. In fact, oftentimes I will tell people to, I equate it to meeting a stranger on the street, right? You meet a stranger on the street, you may not particularly know this person, you wouldn't just take them home and introduce them to your family. You want to get to know them first. So sometimes I suggest to my students, dig right in. Go right into the heart of the matter, get right into the body information, start typing out what you want to type out. Then once you've got a good sense of the direction, once you've got a good focus, or even once it's finished, you can then go back in and introduce the topic for which you're talking. What comes next is also something you're going to want to consider. And how do I typically end this document? Where's a good stopping point? And this is a difficult question when you're trying to figure that out, especially today. 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when you're out there and you're building up these big, long technical documents, you typically stopped as soon as you ran out of source material, which was very finite for the time. So, I mean, it basically consisted, your limit was your library. That's where you pretty much stop. But today, it has gotten exceedingly difficult in the information age, where you can Google unlimited documentation on all kinds of stuff. So you have to figure out, how do I want to end this document? So the typical shape of workplace documents, it's critical to know that useful documents typically follow a sort of pattern. The introduction. This is going to be what introduces your readers, what attracts the readers, what gets them, first into that document. It announces the writer's viewpoint, and it's always going to preview what follows. So it's not enough to go in and just introduce some mundane background information or things like that. I mean, if you're talking about a standard high school document or something you might have learned in English 101, or English composition, you've got the 4 and 5 part essays. You've got the intro, the body, and the conclusion with the 3-parter. You've got the intro, background, body, conclusion with the 4-parter, and so on and so forth. We don't want to try to do it so densely in technical communication. What we're trying to do is we're trying to introduce readers into something that's going to attract them. Therefore, you need to remember that your introduction has to start off with this rhetorical point, this rhetorical move, and it's going to announce your view. Okay, it's going to state your argument flat out, whether it be an argument, which I would argue all things are an argument, and it's going to preview all things that follow. So it's going to, people would say that is going to be your thesis and all the elements that go along that you are going to use within the body to prove that thesis. The body is going to deliver on the introduction. It's explaining and supporting the writer's viewpoint. It's achieving unity by remaining focused on that viewpoint, and coherence by carrying a line of thought throughout. You have to consider certain transitions, the way that you move from body to paragraph to body paragraph, almost as if you're switching in conversation. You don't want it to feel forced, okay? Remember that good writing always seems conversational to a certain point. Now, you also need to consider audience, who is going to be reading this document, who's going to be, is it going to be a general audience? Is it going to be an audience of my peers? All those things are going to influence the way that you're going to express your viewpoint, the way you're going to try to achieve unity, and the way that you are going to focus on a specific pattern throughout that document. And it's also the coherence is going to be along the lines of trying to maintain a central focus, a central theme, a central thesis. Okay? And then finally, your conclusion, what I call the Alamo. Okay? This is your last stand. It's going to re-emphasize key points. You want to take a position, predict an outcome, offer a solution, or suggest further study, or even maybe list certain gaps in your own logical line of thinking. It is important to touch on some of those key points you messed around in the body, okay? Studies have shown people typically remember a strong portion of the intro. They don't remember a whole lot of information that comes out of a body. But the thing that makes the long and lasting imprint to anyone who is accessing your documentation, and you can tell this by the people who go and access key points and memes and key points on Facebook and all these little documents and dialogues and ways that they consider, people latch on to specific points if they're not done well, especially if it doesn't come with a lasting impression towards the end. People can take or misinterpret the information that you might try to provide. So make sure that you are considering these elements. Add them briefly. We're not asking you to rehash old wounds here in that freaking, conclusion. Go into that conclusion and just re-emphasize key elements briefly. Briefly get to them. Make sure that they're understood. Emphasize the strongest points you want to leave impressed upon your readers and those within the document. Then you have outlining this document, okay? Even the most basic of documents require some sort of minimal outlining, and that could be just the intro, body, conclusion, the three-part essay that I brought up briefly a minute ago. And these are typically not always done on paper. I mean, I know some of you are like, I've never done an intro, body, conclusion, outline on a piece of paper. I just go through the writing. But that's not true. You've done it in your head, okay? You do this in your head with ideas. This stuff formulates within your head. The only reason we typically put it on paper is when it becomes somewhat larger. All right. You see these types of outlining features in what we call informal outlines. Informal outlines are these things that are jotted down, put in list format, bullet points, things like that you want to go in and talk about. Okay. Longer documents are going to require a little bit more detailed outline so that you can visualize your document overall and ensure that those ideas are going to flow logically from one point to the next. You want to make sure that everything is going to fall the way that it needs to, and it's going to help limit your digression within these larger documents, okay? Because we are all guilty of digression. I do it still. This is what we call a formal outline, okay? These are outlines that they will begin as kind of like this bulleted outline, and mess around with Microsoft Outlook or some of your Word document programs. I'm not sure if Google Docs has it or not, this feature, but there are outlining features out there that you can use, that you can go in, fill in specific information, and then when you're ready to go in and make it an essay, just click a button and it converts everything over into this really nice essay format that then you can go in and just streamline and knock out all the things you need to knock out there. When it comes to outlining, you also want to start by searching through the information that you've currently gathered, and just create a random list of key topics within that document, okay? The document that you should include. Now, when you guys go and you start building your your piece for this class, the keystone project that we have of um, designing a document for a broader general audience based on some scientific journal or journal article. What you're going to want to do is you're going to compile all those points that you've gone through in that journal article, and that's going to be your breakdown of what you're going to include. What does my audience need? What do they not need? What does it mean to them? What does it mean for them? All those things are considered. And then you want to reorganize that list into an introduction, body, and conclusion, and decide how you want to divide each of those into parts, into subtopics. Okay. So when you go and you break it up, you can then go and insert it and make it look less random. And this is also going to include within that article, or it's going to not just include the points from that article, but any research that you've done outside of that article that I'm requiring for that assignment. So that's what you're going to add into it. Then that formal outline and planning that long document, an author or a team, they rarely begin with any kind of formal outline. It's typically going to start out as an informal outline, something just in the mind, just in the brain, just something that you're sitting around the table, the conference table, and just talking about, jotting down a few quick notes here and there. But eventually, it's going to be within that writing process, you're going to get a longer, more complex document, and this is going to call for much more than just a simple list. It calls for a formal outline using either alphanumeric or decimal notation. Alphanumeric notation, that's going to be referring to the use of the letters and numbers, and this is typically good for when you want to make sure that everything is formatted in such a way that if you like take a piece of that paper from one side over here, you know that this is subtopic 2 that goes in section 1, all that good stuff. And it's really good for those really long documents and for quick glancing. Remember, in TechCom, we're all about bulleted lists. We're all about formalities and outlines, and we're also all about those quick headings, things that we can just jump to. The other way to do this is going to be through decimal notation, or the use of numbers separated by decimal points. And you'll see this also in longer documents, especially within scientific documents, theses, master's projects, doctoral theses, all this good stuff. You'll see those longer ones in there. In fact, a lot of universities require decimal notation. And beyond that, you will also see decimal notation within some of the professional areas that you all move to. Decimal notations they're very great. They're great in a certain way, because these are ways that we can outline a document. But then the really cool point is that we can then leave that decimal notation in there when we go and refine the document for the finished document to help others find information much more rapidly. So they'll be able to go into your table of contents and see that this information is going to be in 4.3, and then they can just jump directly to that area within the document and start what they need to and disregard anything that may not be within their purview or department. So decimal notation is really, really handy, but then again, it can be overboard. It can be a little much if it's just somewhat of a less formal document, or if it's a document that's not quite that long. Alphanumeric notation. Here's like an example of it. Okay, here, check this out, and you'll see that the introduction, body, conclusion, they all use like these Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. Major topics use capital letters A, B, C. Major subtopics, these are going to use Arabic numbers. 1, 2, and 3, and yes, those are Arabic numbers 1, 2, and 3. So I love to hear the arguments out there whenever I see people talking about how we're thinking about. I think I saw this on a Facebook meme where they were talking about we're going to change all of our numbers to Arabic numbers, and people started getting up in arms on Facebook, and I just found this funny. Anyway, that's, again, we digress. This happens. This is not a unique phenomenon for me. And minor subtopics are going to use lowercase letters such as ABC. Each level is going to be indented in a certain way, and it's just to aid in readability, to help you find specific areas. Here's an example of decimal notation. You're going to see the introduction here is, you're going to see the introduction, body, and conclusion use a section number and a 0 to indicate that this is the prime jumping off point, okay? Major topics then are going to use section numbers with a major topic number of 0.1, and then so on and so forth with each additional number to indicate each level. Each level is, again, going to be indented. Now, this is only for outlining. When you go and eventually try to break this down into a finalized document, if you would like to keep the decimal notation, the indentation is not entirely necessary, though you will need to use white space and separation within your document accordingly so that it does not create confusion for the reader. Also, within the formal outline, you want to consider things like you may want to expand on your topic outline into a sentence outline, something that gives you a little bit more direct, precise involvement, and in which each of these sentences is going to serve as a topic sentence. So you could start it out as each topic sentence within that document so that you know exactly where to lead from. And not until you finish the final draft of a long document do you even compose the finished outline, okay? This outline serves as a model for your table of contents, as a check on your reasoning, and as a way of revealing to readers a clear line of thinking. So this isn't just going to be to help you keep on task. It's also going to be something that you're going to have the readers to be able to keep on task as well. And again, like I said, depending on who you're sending this to, departments, contractors, certain areas may want to just jump to specific topics that only pertain to their direct subject matter. So, guidelines for outlining. You want to make sure that you are listing key topics and subtopics that you are going to be including within your document, okay? You want to set up a standard outline. Consider using your word processing program's outlining tool. Like I said, Microsoft Word used to have this. I think I remember checking in one of the latest copies and I didn't find it as well. Maybe it's still there, maybe not. And I'm not entirely sure if Google Docs has that or whatever, word processing software you typically like to use. Place key topics and subtopics where they're going to fit within your standard outline, and make sure that everything is going to logically flow. Nothing should just be interjected in the middle of something and that makes no sense to the greater whole. And not only that, you want to make sure that these key topics are easy to find for those who are looking for them. And then decide use of what you want to do. Do you want to go alphanumeric? Do you want to use decimal notation? But either one you choose, I need you to make sure that you are consistently using these throughout the entire outline. Don't start alphanumeric alone and then drop into decimal notation. It looks shoddy. It looks unprofessional. We are all about uniformity in technical communication. So make sure that you stick to that. All right. And then you want to avoid excessive subtopics. Okay. If it doesn't pertain to that audience, there's no need in listing it. Okay. This is where knowing your audience is extremely important. An audience of your peers is going to need certain information, not more information necessarily, okay? Just different. So they may need a different version of the information that you have, whereas a general audience may need a little bit different as well, or will certainly need different information as well, but they're also going to be looking at information that is going to somewhat expand on certain topics that are certain principles within that realm that you may be discussing if necessary, okay? Not only that, peers are going to want to know the exact hows and whys, whereas the general audience are going to be more inclined to wander into what does this mean to me? And lastly, you want to make sure that you refine your outline as you write your document. Right? The outline is the great thing about it is it is not set in stone. It is meant to be just a guide for you to make sure that all this stuff goes according to plan. So as you're moving down, and I know you guys have heard this in your comp classes, English 101s, and what have you, or even in high school, as you write a paper, the thesis tends to how do they say, evolve. And it's the same thing here. It's not just the thesis or the main overall point that you're making within that document is going to evolve, but also your outline evolves as well. Okay, so don't think that just because that one little subtopic in your outline says that this is necessary, you don't have to include it. Okay, that's the great thing. You can take it out entirely if you need to, or you can add something new, however you need to justify it and make it happen. All right, so let's go on to storyboarding here. So another method that you can try outside of outlining for organizing, usually this is something that they use to organize websites, but they also use it for movies, videos, documentaries, things of that nature. It's to use this storyboard, okay? And it's a sketch of the finished document. All right, so here I have put an example up. If you look, you'll see section title, and this is all sources for EMF exposure, right? So then this storyboard lists text, visual, text, visual. Storyboarding takes into account ideas of the way that the eyes move throughout a document very specifically, okay? We typically, in American culture, move from left to right, down, okay? And mixing it up with short bits of text within a web document or something of that nature, all these things tend to help the reader understand and not get bogged down with information overload, and where you get the glazed over expressions that you would typically see within an audience. So then we would implement some visuals in there and kind of like mix it up a little bit. So you want to follow document creation points so that you can create an effective document that will help eyes track, help readers track, and help keep their attention. First, you want to start with paragraphing within that. Paragraphing is basically going to mean that each supporting paragraph within the larger introduction, body, and conclusion structure is similarly structured. Okay, you don't want any kind of surprises in there. Each paragraph must contain somewhat of an introduction or some kind of topic sentence. Okay, nothing just to exist out there on its own. If you can't think of a topic sentence for a paragraph, 9 times out of 10, it probably belongs in either the preceding or following paragraph. So you wanted to introduce some kind of idea, judgment, or an opinion in some context, right? The body of each of these paragraphs is going to consist of sentences that are logically connected to that topic sentence. They create a unity, a coherence. And not only do they connect to that topic sentence, but they are going to connect to the document as well. Again, avoid digression, avoid getting too wordy. Just make sure that you're sticking to exactly what you need to within the subtopic realm. And then you have the conclusion. And in that conclusion, each paragraph is going to be a restatement of the topic sentence or a smooth transition into the next paragraph, okay? So in those paragraphs, the conclusion, you're going to have a final sentence that's either going to transition me into that next paragraph where it's going to kind of like restate the original topic, or it's at least going to try to bring some closure, okay? It's not going to have me asking questions like why, where, when, how. Those answers are going to be made for me. You want to consider chunking, okay? And this is also going to be an effective way that people tend to take information, whether it be digital, through digital means, or analog. Even in your books, when you open your books, everything is done in this chunking technique. The way that we chunk information is this breaking down into discrete digestible units, and it's based on users' needs and that document's purpose. So you don't want to overload a large amount of one bit of, like, some of you, I've read some of the documentation that comes from my students, and they go into a lot of heavy information in one paragraph, okay? Let's try to avoid that. What we typically want to do is we tackle one specific tough subject within a chunk of paragraph, okay? Let's tackle that, make sure that gets done, and then we can move on to some more intricate technicalities. Chunking is a way for your people, the way that your audience is going to be able to digest that information. And if they're not digesting it, they're tossing it out, or they're just not reading it. If they become bogged down, or if their eyes become glazed over, they will stop paying attention. Websites typically rely on this concept of chunked information, in that when they're writing for, when you're writing for the web, you typically use smaller chunks than you would in print. And the reason why is because digital eye strain, the ways that eyes are, the digital pixel actually affects an eye of a reader. Readers just typically expect to see smaller pieces of information online. It's just the way this culture has grown. So we typically chunk that a little differently than we would typically with a textbook. So for a longer document, you want to provide something of an overview, and this is you're going to consider giving readers an immediate preview of contents by answering initial questions. So what is the purpose of this document? Why should I read it? What information can I expect to find here? Other ways that we can say this might be a summary, and longer forms of this are called executive summaries. They're typically about a page long, and these are given to executives sitting on a board who need slightly more information than your average reader, but don't want to get bogged down in heavy detail either. So these kind of overviews, previews are really great for helping people to understand what's coming and what to expect within that document, or even if it even pertains to them. Some people may not even, it may have been a mass email sent out, and that's the great thing about working in the field that I do in academia. Typically, I can run through and I can read subject headings or even a small intro into the email and know whether or not that even pertains to me, if it interests me, or if I just need to go ahead and just disregard it. Different cultures. So when you're talking about organizing these things for global audiences, different cultures are going to have varying expectations as to just how this information should be organized. So you want to keep considerations in mind, right? You want to make sure that you consider digression. North Americans don't tolerate digression. It tends to interrupt the logical flow of paragraphs, but some cultures consider digression a sign of intelligence or politeness. In fact, in some countries, digression is expected, and a certain digression often leads to a point that the reader comes to on their own. However, for the sake of this class and for technical communication, we do not digress. We tend to stay on topic and we flow with what needs to happen. Okay, we don't try to digress if at all possible. In fact, we remain direct. And directness, all right, especially when you're talking about bad news, North Americans tend for you to rip that Band-Aid right on off there. North Americans prefer to gently lead into bad news sometimes, but some cultures prefer to get the bad news over with immediately and get it out of the way. It also is determined by the subculture. How might people in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan respond to information? Would they prefer you get it out of the way, or would they rather you beat around the bush, as we would say in the South, in Georgia? In New York, again, you might want to rip that old Band-Aid off and just get it out of the way and let's get to it. All right. This is not to say either one is right, good or bad, but given the circumstances with any type of culture that you are going to be speaking with or subculture, it's always important to understand this information. I do this myself often when I respond to emails. Sometimes I respond a little too brashly, a little too abruptly, and I don't mean to do those kinds of things. It's just a habit of my culture that I need to do inner reflection to try to alleviate some. So it's often good if you have a question about just how direct you should or should not be within a document, I would suggest you find a coworker or someone to go in and give you their perception on how direct or indirect you're being and whether or not you're over the top on either way. Keep in mind, it's good to have multiple eyes look at that, because you are going to have multiple people have a differing opinion about the way directness should be. Therefore, I would suggest several eyes on that. All right. Finally, let's go ahead and wrap up. What we're going to be doing is I want you to consider some questions here, okay? I want you to consider why is organizing information important? What makes organizing information important, okay? Second, I want you to think, what are the 3 main parts of workplace documents and what is the function of each one? Third, how do you create an informal outline? Is it something that comes to you spontaneously? Is it something that you write down? How would you go about making an informal outline? Fourth, what is a formal outline? Fifth, what is the difference between alphanumeric notation and decimal notation? And when should you know to use each? How should you know to use each? What is a storyboard? What does it mean to storyboard? What elements does the storyboard provide in contrast to traditional outlining? So also, what is paragraphing and how should paragraphs be organized? Right? Remember when we talked about each paragraph as its own mini story there. It's got its intro, body, conclusion within it, right? Look at your transitions as kinds of conclusions. What is chunking and how is it useful? Where is it useful? What methods, what types of media would it be the most useful? How do we break it up? Think about white space and think about how we organize certain documents. What's an overview and when should you provide an overview? All right. Should you provide an extensive overview, aka an executive summary, or should it just be a brief overview that's going to explain what somebody's about to get themselves into? What are 2 ways you might organize a document differently for some global audiences? When you consider things like culture or when you consider subcultures, especially within the continental United States, because we are not one culture. There is, I defy anyone to show me a one American culture. There are multitudes of cultures within our own society. As you have heard people say, we are a melting pot. It might be better described that we are a tossed salad of different belief systems, cultures, whether or not we like direct or indirect contact, and those kinds of considerations. So with that, I'm going to conclude this section of the course. That was organizing for readers. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in to HU 3120 Scientific and Technical Communication, and I look forward to seeing you guys around more often within the next lesson.